Hey folks, Agent Chip Tremper with Preferred Properties here with you, and we are up in the North Danville Sugar Woods of the original George Cary Sugar Bush, currently of Cary in Maine, and I am pleased to have with me Dr. Matthew Thomas, who is an eminent maple history historian, and he actually wrote the book on George Cary, who was the Maple King of St. Johnsbury. And Matt, first of all, thanks for joining us. It's such a pleasure to have you here every spring. We've done this for a couple years in a row now, and you led a tour for the Maple Festival.
That's correct.
In St. Johnsbury.
Thank you.
I'm going to toss this off to the side. A couple things. I wanted to ask you, number one, how did you actually get started? Now, you're a PhD archaeologist. How does that translate to maple?
Well, I'm actually a PhD in environmental sciences, environmental studies. I started off as an archaeologist, which led me to maple, and then I got interested in the whole history of maple and segued that into the forest side of it, the forest studies for environmental studies, which is how I found a perfect PhD program to cobble all my interests together. But it started with archaeology, like you said. My undergraduate degree and early years of research were as an archaeologist, and I was working in the north woods of Minnesota and Wisconsin, and we would find the remains of old maple sugaring camps that were used and abandoned, and debris like cans and evaporators were left behind, and I didn't really know very much about it. I didn't grow up in a maple syrup family, so I figured out I should know about these. It's part of the job, and they were very interesting. So that led me to go down a path of wanting to learn more, and then discover that not very many people had researched these topics from a historical point of view, let alone an archaeological point of view, understanding the artifacts and material remains, and I got what they sometimes call maple fever, and got hooked on the topic and the history, and turned it into kind of a niche where I'm one of the very few who focuses exclusively on the history of the maple syrup industry, including the archaeology. I still do a little bit of that, but now I'm interested in all of the history of it, which led me to discover there was this amazing story of this George Cary fella, and got interested in that, dug in deeper, and led me to have enough material to write a book. But the research never stops. I'm pretty much going to have to rewrite that book with another dozen chapters, and keep telling the rest of the story, which is why I did a maple tour this last weekend in St. Johnsbury, connected to the Kingdom Maple Festival as an event there, where we got on a bus and drove around to a dozen sites related to the history of George Cary and how it connects to St. Johnsbury's history as the maple center of the world. Which was what it was called about 120 years ago, because George Cary had the largest maple sugar operation in the world. And they don't make maple sugar like that today. It's about maple syrup. But he was interested in maple sugar, which was used in more industrial ways with processing tobacco. But that expanded into all aspects of the maple industry. He was involved in syrup and manufacturing equipment and other things, which is why they called him the Maple King.
Yeah, well, and you and I got to know each other based off the pipeline. George Cary didn't invent it, but he bought into the production. This is early, what, 1910?
No, 1918. 1918
a little bit,
got involved.
A little bit later.
Yeah.
So 1918, of course, they don't have plastic tubing at that point. They don't have plastic. But a fella invented rolled tin tubing, which clipped together. And I live up here in the woods just up the road, and I happened to find a pile of the stuff rotting in the woods. And I reached out to Peggy Pearl of the History and Heritage Center, fantastic resource, and she showed me the book, and I bought your book and read it cover to cover in one night.
Really?
Yep. And then, of course, your contact was information, and we reached out, and here we are today. But George was a major entrepreneur and had his hands in everything.
Yes, he was.
How did he get started?
That's a really interesting story. So he wasn't a maple syrup producer or really even a farmer. He was a grocery salesman that went town to town in New England selling or taking orders and delivering orders of groceries to the local general store in each little town. And he was, it was a tough time of spring, and he was really desperate to make a sale in the town of Craftsbury, Vermont. And he was working with a grocery local general store owner to convince him to take and place an order of groceries with him. And the store owner said, well, I'm not ready to give you a cash order, but I've got 1,500 pounds of maple sugar I will trade you for an order of groceries. And George was anxious to get back to his home office in Maine at the time with some kind of an order to show for his work. And so he said, yes, I'll take the 1,500 pounds of sugar. He gets back and they said, well, now, George, you own 1,500 pounds of sugar. Turn it into money. We didn't authorize you to make exchanges for sugar. And so he quickly turned around the next week. While traveling again for his job on a train, he met a tobacco salesman, struck up a conversation about how did tobacco products get processed, which he learned there was a lot of sugar used, and from the Caribbean, from the Barbados sugar as they called it. And George said, well, has anyone ever tried maple sugar as a processing tool for tobacco? And the tobacco salesman said no, but it should work just as well. And George said, well, I've got some maple sugar I'd be interested in putting in your hands. And the tobacco salesman said, well, I can't take that. Well, George, both of them being good salesmen, but George kept working his magic and said, well, I'll take an order of your cigars in this particular case, or I think it was even 3 cases of cigars, if you'll take 300 pounds of maple sugar in exchange. And the tobacco salesman agreed, took the sugar back to his company in South Carolina, I believe it was, and said, well, I'll have my people try it out and see what they think. A little while later, George gets a call, or a telegram at the time, and is told, we like it, get some more sugar. We'll take as much sugar as you can get. And George he continued to be a traveling grocery salesman for another 10 years, but he then started going into the maple sugar business, buying sugar and then shipping it to the tobacco people. And that became so lucrative in time, in 10 to 15 years. He left all the grocery business behind and completely focused on sugar, and then it even exploded from there, and he branched into all different aspects of the sugar industry. Maple industry,
and stuff.
Candies, and he owned different companies that didn't have his name. His company was the Cary Maple Sugar Company. He had a hand, sometimes kind of a quiet investor. People didn't know about it as widely at the time. From my research, I would learn later that, well, actually he owned part of that company, and he owned a part of that company, and he invested there, and he expanded into Canada and built. He had a big 4-story plant that he constructed in St. Johnsbury, which is still standing. He built another plant almost identical to it in Quebec, and it was a worldwide operation, so to speak.
Yeah. Now, one thing that I found interesting is that, and we talk about, sugar making. It's always been about sugar making. Nowadays, of course, people use maple syrup on their pancakes and in their coffee and cooking and such. But back then, farmers and sugar makers were actually making sugar.
They were.
When did it sort of shift from sugar to more the liquid syrup stuff?
That's a good question. I mean, there was a couple different things going on in the early 20th century. So after 1900, after the Civil War in particular, but after 1900, the prices of white sugar, cane sugar, table sugar that we know today went way down. In the past, they have been very expensive, and maple sugar was less expensive, which was one of the reasons people made maple sugar and used maple sugar, because it was more readily available in New England, but less expensive than cane sugar.
And local.
And local, right. And but then white sugar was became less expensive. It was always desired a little bit more because it was a little more refined and the quality control was a little bit higher. Maple sugar could be a real mixed bag on what you might get. There's some that made things that were almost like white sugar, and others that made things that were like the darkest brown sugar you can possibly imagine, with an extremely strong flavor, which was not to everyone's liking. But so white sugar became less expensive, so that became more common and available to people to purchase, and especially outside of New England in other grocery capacities. But then there were other things that happened where there was a development of a table syrup market. The idea of buying a bottle of syrup at the grocery store to pour on your pancakes really wasn't something that you did in the late 1800s or before. But there were people in the syrup industry, some of them were blended syrups, not pure maple syrups, who really put a lot of money into marketing and developing the idea of this specialty food especially for children, but for your breakfast. There was kind of a creation of a breakfast food industry that didn't exist the same way. I mean, we all ate breakfast, right?
Yeah.
But they spent millions of dollars on advertising and other things, and the maple syrup industry was a part of that. And so then people started shifting towards more of this bottled syrup product, and leaving maple sugar behind. There was continued production of maple sugar, primarily still for the tobacco people or for flavoring some products like making ice creams and other candies, where the sugar side of it was still popular. But gradually maple syrup became the primary product made in the sugar bush in the woods of Vermont and New England and Canada and adjacent Canadian provinces.
Sure, where the natural range of the sugar maple tree.
Exactly. Very, very good places to make it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and one thing that you shared with me, which really surprised me, was that it was really the blenders like Log Cabin who vastly expanded the market, and maybe they were 20% maple syrup, or maybe less, maybe more, but they became such a force in the market that they kind of dragged the pure maple syrup along with them.
Right. It's an interesting bit of the history that's not as well understood, or sometimes as well embraced. The maple producers today are very interested in promoting their pure product, but part of the reality to the history is that the blended syrup folks, who, like you said, their syrup might have been 25% maple syrup and 75% cane syrup or corn syrup too. They were the ones who did the marketing work and bought millions and millions of gallons of maple syrup to go into their blended syrup, even though it was only 25%. The volume of their sales nationally and even somewhat internationally, but nationally, was so great that they were the real movers in creating a table pancake breakfast syrup market and industry, and in some ways it helped save the maple syrup industry, or give it a new life to expand when it was transitioning out of sugar and having to find a new way to be meaningful and save the sugar bushes and the labor and the investment in all of those farm industries. So.
Yeah. Now, I know that you are in demand. You speak all over the country. You speak internationally. You speak in Canada and stuff. Give us your thoughts on where the maple syrup industry is today, and perhaps what you see coming up down the road. I know that speaking with Lieutenant Governor David Zuckerman, he has, and I'm sure you have mentioned this to me as well, but he has talked about a vast increase in taps. Vermont is #1 in the United States again. Sometimes they weren't, but Canada vastly outproduces the U.S. But just give us your thoughts on where we're at today. I know it's growing in Vermont, and that's a good thing. It's sort of replacing some of the other agricultural products that we're struggling with in Vermont. But what do you see?
Well, it's a good question. it's always fun to ask a historian a futurist question, but you're absolutely right. The industry it's strong right now and it's growing. So in some of the more fringe, and that's not the best word, but outer edges of the maple zone, say Minnesota and Wisconsin, where they make maple syrup, the maple trees grow there, they have all the right conditions, and they do have a maple syrup industry. Things are kind of steady there. In other parts where it's more a bigger part of the farm economy, like Vermont, New York, Maine, it's expanding. The maple industry is growing, especially in the United States. It's growing across the border in Quebec. It's growing. They're adding millions of taps a year. Millions of taps a year. There's no stagnation. Yearly climate. Maple is a funny thing. It can be drastically affected by unpredictable climate issues in a year. And not so much climate change, although climate change is an issue, but you could have a very good year, like any farm product, and production could be down. The next year it could be up. You never know. But regardless, the overall maple industry is expanding. I wouldn't say exponentially, but fairly strongly. People continue to buy maple syrup. They keep expanding into new product lines and new value-added products and other ways to use maple syrup, not just pancake syrup, coming up with creative uses and promoting it that way. There's great promotion coming out of Canada. They're very organized and very good at telling people all about maple and trying to find new markets for it, both internationally and domestically. So the maple industry is strong. Climate change is very real and makes for greater unpredictability, but it's not decimating the maple industry. You'll see these kind of newspaper stories of, oh my gosh, climate change is going to ruin the maple industry. Well, that's not true. It's resilient in certain ways. It will benefit some areas and be tougher in others, but you're not going to all of a sudden see an empty shelf in the grocery store where the maple syrup used to be, especially when we're adding millions of taps a year in some areas. It's strong. It's good, and it's going to be there for a while.
Yeah, you mentioned international markets, and I'm just wondering. I don't know how much you're in touch with Europe or the East, the Mid East, the Far East. Is maple a thing in Europe and internationally? Is that sort of like maybe a vast untapped market that nobody knows about, or they've been exposed to it and it's sort of
It's not unknown it's not an unknown market. They're working very hard to open those markets. Japan loves the Japan consumers love maple products. It's expensive to get there, and it can be an expensive product, but they're very interested and they're hitting that market. Those that are trying to expand markets are working very hard on Japan, other parts of Asia, but Japan is a very hot one. Europe is also, and the Middle East those three are all being aggressively pursued, absolutely. And interestingly, you can make maple syrup in Europe. It's not the sugar maple, but they have different species of maple which produce sweet sap, and there are in Russia commercial maple syrup operations. There are in Japan commercial maple syrup operations. There's very few, and they're nothing of the scale that you can find in North America. And they're also experimenting with things like that in New Zealand. So there's different parts in the northern and southern hemispheres that have the right kind of trees and the right kind of climate that are exploring this, which is fun to watch. It's just fascinating to think about how do they do it. And we see a CDL evaporator. I've seen a CDL evaporator in videos from Russia of maple syrup production. So who knows? Maybe the future is in Russia. I'm saying that a little bit tongue in cheek, but it's pretty neat to see.
Yeah. Now, what's next for you? I know, yearly you come back and we are finding more and more treasures in the woods. Is there another book in your future?
There's many.
Good.
I have a few books right now. I have a website called maplesyruphistory.com, and I write articles for a couple, 2 or 3 newsletters, maple industry newsletters. I write articles for history publications and other things. So I'm always cranking out new work. Some are shorter projects, others are multi-year projects like books.
Yeah.
And so there's more coming. There's the Maple King book, which you mentioned at the beginning. I'm going to revise that because there's so much more new research to add to the story. And then I like when people ask me good questions, and it makes me come up, or either I know an answer or I don't, and that makes me go down a new research path, and all of a sudden I've got a new topic to tackle. So I have no loss for work and topics to write about. But
Awesome.
there's more coming.
And if somebody watching this video has a tidbit and wants to lead you down a rabbit hole, how can they get in touch with you?
That's a good question. On my website, maplesyruphistory.com, there is a contact us page form. You can fill that out, and it'll send an email to me, and I will get back to you very quickly.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Which is how we met.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for spending time with us. Can't wait till you come back again, because we are digging up all kinds of new sites, and there'll be some new additions here at Cary in Maine. We have found a basically intact sugaring operation. We had a hurricane come through Vermont in 1938 and wiped out most of the large trees, and a local farmer walked out of a sugar house, closed the door on it in 1938, and it was basically untouched until Matt and I stumbled onto a thread, and we pulled on the thread, and we ultimately found it, and it's literally a time capsule of what sugaring equipment in the operation was, and we are going to excavate that and bring it down and set up a living museum up here in the original George Cary sugar bush at Cary in Maine. So yeah, lots more cool stuff to come.
Yes, indeed.
So, and thanks for the inspiration.
Oh, it's fun to do.
Yeah. Agent Tremper with you for American Dream TV. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again next time. Let's go get something to eat.
You betcha.